We're nearing the end of this super long module where a lot was covered. Now, there's one last feature which I want to show you, which you won't use too often, but which can be extremely valuable for some tiny convenience things you want to do in your components, mostly when focusing text inputs and stuff like that. Now, let me show you what I mean. We do have a text input in person.js, and let's say we want to focus the text input of the first person here whenever it is rendered to the screen. Now, focusing this input is actually not that straightforward here, because we would like to call the focus method we can get on this input element at a certain point of time. So for example, after a component did mount, or in this method to be precise, so that we know that it exists. Now, for that we need access to the input element so that we can call the focus method from this method. And there might be some workarounds which you can find with setting some state and then rendering this input conditionally in the focused state or unfocused state. And actually, oftentimes you should try to use these workarounds, but especially for focusing, there's a quick and easy way which is perfectly fine to use: a reference. You can add a special property or attribute to input, which is called ref. Just like key, that's a special property known by React. Ref takes a dynamic input, which should be a function. So here I'll use an arrow function. And in this function, you set up a reference to this element. So as an input, you get access to this element. You can name this whatever you want, like INP for input. And in there, you can now define a property of this class. And this already is important. References are only available in stateful components, so in components which are created with class and extends component. There, you can then add a new property to the class by simply adding this and then the name of the property, any property you want, like input element. Again, this name is totally up to you. This will create a new property for your entire class, so for the person class, which you can therefore use from anywhere in the class. And it will be created at the point of time render runs. So if you later try to access it from within component.mount, that will work, because component.mount, as you learned, is actually executed after render. Now, this alone won't do the trick. We need to assign a value to this newly created property, and the value should be INP, so this input element we got access to. So now we have a property on the class which gives us access to this input element. And in component.mount, we can now call this input element focus. The focus method is a method available on input elements. Now if we save this and we open this page, you see that the last element is focused. The last one because focus is called for everyone, and therefore, since only one element can be focused at a time, it simply sticks to the last one which was rendered, the last one which called focus. Now if you wanted to make sure that the first element gets focused, you would need to pass the position, which you have in your persons.js file where you loop with the index. You would have to pass this as a prop, so that you maybe pass position, which in the end is just the index, and if position is 0, then you want to call this. And then in person.js, you would simply add a if statement where you check if this prop's position is equal to 0. So if this is the first element, then you want to call this focus method, otherwise you won't do anything. And now with that, if you click toggle, the first element will be focused. These are references, important. You may only use them in stateful components. You can also use them on your own components. You're not limited to HTML elements like input. And you should use them with care. Don't try to get lazy, and certainly don't do things like this input element style background color equals something. Do this with the previous tools you learned for dynamically adjusting styles or for doing anything dynamic. This should not be your shortcut for being lazy. It is for a few selected things, mostly really about controlling focus or media playback, and not for styling or displaying. Use the other tools you learned, otherwise you're not doing it the React way.